He thought he'd shut the door on love forever. She was just looking for shelter from the rain, neither of them knew. That night would change everything. If you believe in second chances, quiet heroes, and the kind of stories that stay with you long after the screen fades, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that feel like home. The rain had started around dusk, slow and steady at first, then heavier. The kind of rain that made the roof groan and the wind sigh through the cracks in the siding. Luke Harrow stood under the narrow eave of his porch, shirt sleeves rolled, pushing a handsaw through a warped plank of cedar. The wood was old, like most things around his house, but it was solid enough, and the work kept his hands busy and his mind quieter. He didn't look up when the first knock came. Too soft. Could have been wind. But then came a second, firmer. He froze, the saw blade pausing mid-stroke. No one knocked here. Luke laid the saw down on the bench beside him, wiped his palms on his jeans, and turned toward the door. When he opened it, the cold air rushed in, and so did the silence. There she stood, a woman in a soaked jacket, hair clinging to her face, cradling a little girl who looked barely 6. The child held a stuffed bear, limp, rain-drenched, one eye, missing. They looked like they had walked through miles of storm, or maybe something worse. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know where else to go. Our car broke down. We just need to get out of the rain. Just for a little while." Luke looked at her, then at the girl, then past them to the empty road that disappeared into the trees. He didn't answer. He hadn't let anyone into his home, not truly, for over 3 years. Not since the fire, not since Amy. But the child was shivering now, cheeks flushed red, eyes glassy. She coughed once, small, tight. Luke stepped back. The woman hesitated, then walked in, whispering a thank you. She left puddles in her wake. So did the girl. The bear gave a soft, wet plop as it bumped against her coat. Luke closed the door. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and old ash. The wood stove still glowed from earlier in the afternoon, casting a soft amber hue across the worn floorboards. Luke tossed in 2 more logs, then motioned to the wool blanket on the couch. The woman settled the girl down gently. "Her name's Maisie," she said. "I'm Elena." Luke nodded once. "Luke." Maisie looked at him, not with fear, but with something more cautious, like a deer not yet sure if it should run. Then she buried her face in the bear. Luke turned to the kitchen. He hadn't made tea in a long time, but he found a box tucked behind the coffee canister. Peppermint. Not ideal, but warm. He handed the mug to Elena. She took it with both hands, grateful but not overly expressive, like someone not used to kindness without a catch. "Thank you," she said. He just nodded again. The storm picked up outside. Wind howled through the chimney. Rain tapped like impatient fingers on the tin roof. Luke sat in his usual chair, across the room. He could see the steam rise from the mug in her hands, see the frayed cuff of her jacket, the scuff on her boots. The child had curled up now, small feet under her, bare tucked to her chest. No one spoke for a while, and somehow, it didn't feel uncomfortable. Elena broke the silence. "You live here alone?" Luke didn't look up. "Just me." She nodded, slowly. "Nice place, quiet." "It's old." She smiled faintly. "Old can be good?" Luke didn't respond. His eyes fell to the scar on his wrist, a faint rope of pink, usually hidden beneath his sleeve. He rubbed it unconsciously. He hadn't planned on guests tonight, hadn't planned on anyone ever. Later he brought out an extra quilt and laid it on the end of the couch. "She can sleep here," he said. "You too if you want." "I'll be on the floor," Elena replied quickly. "She'll take the couch." He didn't argue, just nodded. That was becoming a habit again. He watched as she tucked Maisie in, moving with the gentle efficiency of a mother who had done this many times in uncertain places. The kind who slept lightly, always half ready to run. She turned off the lamp. The room fell into soft shadow, lit only by the flickering stove. Luke stood near the door, unsure what to do with his hands. Eventually, he said, "I'll be up early. If your car's close, I'll help you get it running." A pause, then her voice low. "It's not just the car." He met her eyes for the first time in full, and saw in them a weariness that matched his own. Not just tiredness, the kind of ache that lived in the bones. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. Instead, Luke walked to the window, watched the rain blur the edges of the world. He used to believe no one would ever knock on his door again. Not since the fire. Not since Amy. Not since he'd closed that part of himself off. But now there was a little girl asleep on his couch, and her mother, watching the storm from his living room, holding a cup he'd poured. And somehow, without planning it, without wanting it, a door inside him had quietly begun to open. Morning came late in Metteridge. The rain had passed, but gray clouds lingered like a second skin over the hills. The trees outside dripped quietly, their leaves still heavy with the storm. Luke stood by the stove, pouring coffee into an old enamel mug. He hadn't slept much, not because of the weather, because of them. He heard a soft rustle behind him. Elena stepped into the kitchen, her hair pulled back in a loose, hurried knot. She wore the same clothes as the night before, still damp around the edges. Maisie wasn't with her. "She's still asleep," Elena said gently, as if reading his mind. She was exhausted. Luke handed her a mug, black coffee, no cream, no sugar. "Thanks," she said, accepting it with both hands like it was a fragile gift. They stood in silence, the way people do when words might cause more damage than good. The house felt different this morning. Luke had never considered himself a lonely man. Solitary, yes, but not lonely. There was a difference. Solitude was chosen. Loneliness crept in uninvited, but now, with a mother and child sleeping in his home, the stillness didn't feel like peace. It felt like the calm before something he couldn't name. He watched Elena glance around the kitchen, the weathered countertops, the open shelves lined with mismatched mugs, the faded photograph of a woman and a child on the windowsill. She looked at the photo a moment longer. "That's your wife?" she asked softly. Luke nodded. "She was beautiful." "She was," he said. "And the little girl?" He swallowed, hard. "Emily. Our daughter." A beat passed. Elena didn't ask the obvious question. "Where are they now?" She didn't need to. The weight in his voice was enough. Instead, she placed her mug down and said gently, "I'm sorry." Luke didn't answer. He didn't have the strength to accept sympathy that morning. After breakfast, toast, barely warm eggs, and awkward thank yous, Luke offered to drive them into town. Her car was still dead at the gas station, and walking that stretch of road with a child wasn't an option. Maisie clung to her mother's side, her little hand tangled tightly in Elena's. She didn't speak, but she watched everything. Observant. "Quiet. She doesn't talk much," Elena said on the ride into town. "Not since—" She trailed off. Luke didn't press. At the station, the mechanic said the alternator was shot. Parts would take a few days. Luke nodded, paid the deposit, and told Elena quietly, "You'll need a place until it's fixed." "I can sleep in the car," she replied quickly. Too quickly. He gave her a look, not stern but steady. "Not with a kid, not out here." Elena hesitated. "We'll figure something out." "You can stay," Luke said. "Just for a few days." She stared at him. Disbelief, then a flicker of hope, then doubt. "You don't even know us." Luke kept his eyes on the road. "I don't need to. I know what it looks like when someone's out of options." That night, Elena cooked, Just a simple soup, but the smell of garlic and thyme filled the house in a way it hadn't in years. Maisie helped stir the pot, her little hands careful and deliberate. Luke watched them from the doorway. He thought about Amy, about how she used to hum when she chopped onions, about how the house used to be full of sound, of little footsteps, of laughter, of life. And now here they were. Two strangers rebuilding something without even knowing. It later, after Maisie had fallen asleep, Elena stood in the doorway of the porch, arms wrapped around herself. Luke stepped out, handed her a blanket. "You don't have to keep your guard up," he said. She looked at him. "Don't I?" "I'm not going to ask why you ran," he said, "or from who, but I've seen people running before. You don't carry yourself like someone who's lost. You carry yourself like someone who survived." That caught her off guard. For a moment, her face cracked. The weariness surfaced. "It's not about surviving anymore," she whispered. "It's about keeping her safe." Luke nodded. He understood that. More than she knew. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the woods, a branch snapped. Elena flinched. Luke noticed. "You'll be safe here," he said. "I don't let storms take things twice." She looked at him, studied him, not with suspicion, but something closer to reverence. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. Luke took a long breath, then said honestly, "Because someone once helped me. And I didn't say thank you, not the way I should have. This is me trying to do it better." She didn't reply, but she didn't need to. Sometimes the most important promises are the ones spoken only in silence. Inside, Maisie stirred in her sleep. Elena brushed her hair back, humming under her breath. Luke stood in the hallway, not intruding, not leaving, just quietly witnessing. Something was happening here, something he hadn't planned for, something he didn't fully understand. But for the first time in a long time, Luke didn't feel like a man guarding the ruins of his past. He felt like a man holding open a door, unsure of what might come in, but ready, maybe, to let it happen. The hour. Rain didn't return that week, but the sky still held its gray like an old coat. Worn, familiar, a little too heavy to shrug off. Luke stood on Elena's roof just after noon, boots braced on the worn shingles, tool belt snug around his waist. Below, Elena pointed at the worst of the leaks with her sleeve pulled halfway over her hand. "It started dripping over the stove last night," she called up. "Right on my last slice of bread." Luke gave a dry smile. "That's just this roof's way of saying it's hungry." She cracked a smile back. Small, but it stuck longer than he expected. Maisie stood behind her mother, holding her bare, like a shield. Still quiet, still watchful. But her eyes followed Luke now, not with fear, with curiosity. He started pulling up shingles, feeling the soft rot beneath. The roof hadn't just been neglected. It had been wounded. Years of patches over patches, like someone trying to forget instead of fixing. He knew that feeling. By mid-afternoon, the sun had pushed through a layer of cloud, warming the back of his neck as he worked. He heard footsteps in the grass and glanced down to see Elena coming around the side of the house with 2 mugs in her hands. Coffee, even if it was the instant kind. He climbed down to meet her halfway. "You didn't have to," he said, taking the mug. "You didn't either," she replied, nodding toward the ladder. "Yet here you are." They sat on the porch, steps, mugs steaming between them. Luke looked at the yard. The garden was overgrown. The fence sagged like it had given up. This place had been forgotten long before Elena arrived. "This was your family's?" he asked. She shook her head. "Rented. Belonged to a friend of a friend who owed me nothing but gave it anyway." Luke sipped his coffee. "I used to have property," she added quietly. "Technically, I still do. A lot of it. Land, holdings, money that doesn't feel like mine anymore." Luke turned to her slow. "You left all that behind?" She didn't blink. "What good is land when the people on it own you?" The words hung there. Not poetic, just true. Back on the roof, Luke worked with quiet focus. Each nail he drove in felt like a small act of defiance against the brokenness, not just of this house, but of their histories. Elena watched from below as Maisie played in the grass, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Occasionally, she'd look up and wave. Luke found himself waving back without thinking. That night, the rain came again. Just a light patter. But not a single drop made it through the roof. They ate dinner by lamplight, a can of soup warmed over the stovetop, and thick slices of buttered bread. Maisie sat between them, her cheeks finally showing a hint of color. Elena glanced at Luke. She hasn't laughed in months. Luke looked at the child. She will. She used to sing, Elena said, more to herself than anyone. All the time. Nonsense songs. Songs about clouds shaped like cats and shoes that could fly. Then, one day she just stopped. Luke nodded slowly. Sometimes the world gets loud enough that singing doesn't feel safe anymore. Elena looked at him like he'd just spoken something she couldn't. Did you ever sing? She asked. He smiled, a sad twist of it. Not well. But Amy, my wife, she did. Emily, too. Our daughter. They used to sing together when they cleaned the house. Made the whole place feel like it was breathing. He stopped. That last part had come out too easy. He wasn't used to saying their names out loud anymore. Elena's voice was gentle. What happened? The fire, he said. Just that. The words barely audible. She didn't press. She reached over, placed her hand softly on his. No squeeze, just contact. Just the quiet understanding that they were both living with ghosts. That night, Luke couldn't sleep. He stepped out onto the porch, wrapped in his flannel, listening to the soft rustle of wind in the trees. He thought of the roof, of how it had needed more than patchwork, how most things do. He thought of Elena, the way she spoke without, showing fear, but with her arms always crossed, her shoulders never quite relaxed. The way Maisie hadn't let go of that bear even once, and he thought of himself, how without quite meaning to, he had begun to look forward to hearing their footsteps in the kitchen, their laughter, if it ever came, the sound of life moving, through the hollow rooms he'd once resigned to silence. Back inside, he passed their sleeping forms on the pull-out couch. Elena's arm curved protectively around her daughter, even in sleep. The bear had slipped from Maisie's grasp and now lay half-covered on the floor. Luke bent down, picked it up, brushed it off gently and placed it back into her arms. As he turned to go, Maisie stirred slightly, eyes still closed, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Luke froze. It was the first word she'd spoken since she arrived. He didn't reply, just stood there for a long moment in the dark, listening to the rhythm of two people breathing beside his fire. And somewhere inside him, somewhere beneath the ash and quiet, a warmth began to take root again. The wind arrived first. It wasn't the kind that rattled windows or knocked out power lines, not yet. It came in low murmurs through the trees, brushing past fences and slipping beneath door frames, like a voice whispering just beyond hearing. The air smelled of wet bark, fallen leaves, and something else Luke couldn't quite name. Change. He was restocking firewood when he heard it, the snap of wood, then a sharp intake of breath. He turned fast. Elena was on the ground, sitting. Beside the shed, one hand clutching her ankle, the other braced in mud. He was there in 2 strides. You okay? He asked, kneeling. I tripped, she muttered, grimacing. He looked at the angle of her foot. Not broken, just twisted. Still. She winced hard as he helped her up. His arm slid beneath hers, steady and warm. For a moment, her body tensed. Reflex. He felt it in her shoulders. She wasn't used to being touched. He helped her to the porch steps. Maisie ran out barefoot, eyes wide. I'm fine, sweetheart, Elena said quickly. Just clumsy. Luke went inside and came back with a cold compress, wrapped it in a towel, and crouched at her feet. You don't have to, she started. I know, he interrupted gently. But I'm doing it anyway. She said nothing. Let him tend to her. The wind moved again through the trees, bending the light. Later, With Elena resting and Maisie distracted by a coloring book Luke had dug out of a drawer, the two adults found themselves sitting at the kitchen table. A single lamp glowed between them, softening the corners of the room. She was the one to break the silence. "You ever feel like your body remembers things your mind won't say out loud?" Luke looked up. She continued, her voice even but quiet. "I flinch when doors slam. I hold my breath when someone walks behind me. Even here, safe, calm, I'm waiting for something bad to happen, like I owe the world pain for every second I feel peace." Luke let that sit. The words didn't need rescuing. Then he said, "There's a part of me that still smells smoke every time I close my eyes." Elena's eyes met his. "I was supposed to pick up dinner that night," he said. "Amy and Emily stayed behind. I was late. One-lane bridge was blocked. By the time I got home, the whole side of the house was—" He stopped, swallowed. "I ran in. Got burned pulling a neighbor off the porch, couldn't get to them in time." A long pause. Not silence, just stillness. "I used to think," Luke added slowly, "that if I never let anyone in again, I wouldn't have to fail them." "And now?" Elena asked. "I don't know," he said. "You knocked. I opened the door." She looked down, at her hands. "That night, the night I left, I locked the front door behind me. He was passed out. I took Maisie, a duffel, the keys to a car I didn't own. I didn't even bring her shoes, just ran." Her voice started to break. "Some part of me still thinks, if I'd just stayed quiet, if I'd done everything right, maybe he wouldn't have hit her." Luke's hands clenched under the table. Elena noticed. "Don't. I'm not telling you for pity." "I know," he said, steady. "You're telling me because holding it alone weighs too much." She nodded once. That was all she could give. That was enough. Maisie had fallen asleep on the couch, curled around the stuffed bear like it was armor. Her thumb still rested on the corner of her mouth, a habit she hadn't quite shaken. Luke draped a quilt over her, then stepped out onto the porch where Elena had returned, leaning lightly on the rail. "The storm's really coming this time," he said, nodding at the sky. Elena didn't answer right away. Then, "It's funny." "What is?" "How I came here looking for a place to hide," she said, "and somehow ended up finding a man who sees everything I want to keep hidden." Looked at her, not just her face but her posture, the way she stood like someone ready to leave at the first wrong word. The way her eyes lingered despite herself. "I don't see everything," Luke said, "but I see you trying. That's enough." She exhaled, just barely, but it was a release, a soft surrender. They didn't touch, not yet. But the space between them no longer felt like a void. It felt like breath, like something beginning to fill. The wind picked up again. Leaves scattered across the porch. Somewhere in the woods, a dog barked, then fell silent. Luke watched the trees sway and thought, maybe healing doesn't come all at once. Maybe it comes like this: wind before the storm, an ankle twist, a story told, a name remembered, a moment stayed. The storm held its breath. For 4 days, the clouds hovered but did not break, and the wind pressed gently against the windows without rising. The town of Meadow Ridge basked in an odd, tender pause, like the hush before a baby stirs, or a bird decides to fly. Luke found himself rising earlier than usual, not because of habit or chores, but because there were voices now in his house. Footsteps, laughter, faint, like it hadn't quite remembered how to sound full again. Maisie liked to sit on the back steps and feed breadcrumbs to a pair of sparrows that had nested in the gutter. Elena warned her they'd grow spoiled, but Luke only smiled and said, "Let them be spoiled. They've made it this far." Each day unfolded with an almost domestic rhythm, the kind Luke hadn't known. He missed until it returned. Mornings meant coffee, shared glances, and the occasional question about who'd dreamed what. Afternoons meant chores, fixing the garden fence, trimming branches, repainting the old swing under the maple. Evenings meant dinners with mismatched plates and too much butter on the bread. There was a comfort in the repetition, a rhythm to the small things. Elena hummed when she cooked. Just softly, but it was there. Maisie had begun talking again, mostly in whispers, mostly to the bear, but the words were there, forming like new leaves on a frost-burned tree. And Luke had started whistling under his breath when he worked. That scared him a little. One afternoon, Elena caught Luke smoothing out a warped plank on the old porch table. "Didn't know you were a woodworker," she said. "I'm not," he replied, eyes on the grain, "but I'm good at fixing things that almost broke." She smiled, not wide but real. "That's a gift." "I used to think so," he said. "Then I tried to fix a life. Didn't go so well." Elena stepped closer. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things just need to be carried. Together." Luke looked up at her. The way the late sun filtered through her hair, the way her shoulders sat just a little lower than they had days ago. "You're better with words than you think," he said. She shook her head. "No, I've just had time to learn what matters." On the 5th night, Maisie asked if she could sleep in the big bed. Luke was already brushing his teeth when he heard her small voice drift through the hallway. He stepped out in time to see Elena pause, unsure. Luke knelt beside Maisie, met her eyes. "Why the big bed?" She glanced at her mother, then back at him. "Because in big beds people don't leave." Luke's throat tightened. He reached out and gently smoothed her hair. "You can sleep wherever you want, and I'll be here in the morning. Promise." He didn't say forever, but she didn't ask for forever. She only asked for morning. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Luke and Elena sat on the porch swing, listening to the wind murmur through the leaves. "You've made this place feel like a home," she said. "It was never the walls," he replied. "It's always been the people." Elena looked at him. In the low porch light, her face looked softer, younger, not untouched by pain, but somehow shaped by it in beautiful ways. "I'm scared," she said suddenly. "Of what?" "That we'll lose this, that it's not real, that it's too kind to be true." Luke thought a long time before answering. "You know the tree out back?" he asked. "The maple?" "No. The one next to it, the smaller one." She nodded. "It wasn't planted. It just showed up. Seed from a wind? Probably. First year it barely grew. Second year the frost hit it hard. Third year it started to lean. I almost cut it down. Figured it wouldn't last. But you didn't." "No. And now it's strong enough to carry a swing. You never know what'll grow back, or how strong it's become, until someone leans on it." She was quiet after that, but when she stood, she placed her hand lightly on his shoulder and squeezed. That night, Luke dreamed of laughter in his kitchen, of a hand in his, of footsteps running through the yard. It wasn't Amy's voice in the dream, it wasn't Emily's, it was a new sound, familiar in the way hope is familiar, even after years in the dark. The next morning, he found Elena in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, sleeves rolled, hands stained with soil. Maisie helped, digging careful little holes with a plastic spoon. "What, are you planting?" Luke asked. Elena looked up at him, eyes shining. "Roots," she said. Just that. And Luke understood. The first sign wasn't loud. It came quietly, the way most trouble does. Luke was picking up supplies in town. Extra nails, a new water filter, cinnamon sticks Elena liked to steep in tea. When Sheriff Miller stepped out of the hardware store, coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. "Luke," he said with that steady tone he always used when something was off. "Got a minute?" Luke nodded. They stood by the picket fence outside the general store, autumn leaves swirling around their boots like small red warnings. "Stranger came through town yesterday," the sheriff said. "Out-of-state plates, nice car, too clean for this area." Luke's gut tensed. Asking questions? Didn't ask much. But he lingered. At the diner, down by the old trail. seemed more interested in who lives near the ridge. Luke's land sat on that ridge. So did the old farmhouse Elena was renting. He see Elena or Maisie? Miller shook his head. Not that I know of, but he'll be back. Luke stared out across the street. A chill moved down his spine, but it wasn't from the wind. Just thought you should know, the sheriff added. In case, well, you've got guests now, and folks talk. Luke nodded once. Appreciate it. As Miller walked off, Luke's jaw clenched. He didn't like the way the sky felt suddenly heavier, or the way the town, usually slow and unbothered, now felt like it was holding its breath. Back at the house, Elena was hanging laundry in the weak midday sun. Maisie sat nearby, making crowns out of twigs and golden leaves. Luke stepped onto the porch, set the grocery bags down, and said softly, "We need to talk." She looked at him. No confusion, just quiet dread. It's him, isn't it? Luke didn't answer directly. Sheriff said someone's been sniffing around. Elena dropped the clothespin in her hand. Did he ask for me? No, not yet. But he's close. Maisie looked up, sensing the change in temperature without understanding why. Elena knelt beside her, brushed a curl behind the child's ear. Go inside, honey. Start on your drawing, okay? Maisie obeyed without a word. Luke waited until she was gone before asking, Is it your husband? Ex, she said, voice sharp with old pain. But that word doesn't mean much to men like him. Paper's just paper. Luke sat down on the porch step, hands clasped. You think he's tracking you himself? Probably sent someone first. That's how he does things. Soft approach, then force. She looked at Luke, her eyes hard now. We should go tonight, just leave. You don't have to run. Yes, we do. You have me. That stopped her. Not the words, the way he said them, like a promise he didn't know he'd already made. They didn't argue, but they didn't speak again for a while either. The space between them filled with what-ifs, worst-case scenarios, and long-forgotten instincts. Luke had been a father, a husband, a protector. He knew what it meant, to lose, and he knew how quickly it could happen. That night, Elena packed a bag, just in case. Luke walked the perimeter twice, checked the locks, double-checked them, then sat on the porch with his rifle across his lap. Not to shoot, not yet, but just to feel like the line between safety and danger wasn't entirely imaginary. Around 2 a.m., the wind picked up. Not storm wind. Not yet. Just enough to rattle the old gate and whisper through the broken fence. Luke was still awake when he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. One car, lights off. Too slow to be passing through. He stood, heart thudding, and stepped down the porch. The car stopped just short of the mailbox. Someone opened the door. A figure in a coat stepped out, looked toward the house, then back at the road. Luke didn't move. Didn't speak. The figure hesitated, then got back in and drove off. No headlights, no plates, no name. But Luke had seen the outline of the man, had seen the stance, a predator's poise, the kind that didn't chase, just waited for the right moment to strike. The next morning, the leaves looked duller, the wind sharper. Maisie didn't laugh that day, didn't ask for her stories, just clung to the bear like it was a parachute. Luke watched her from the porch and thought, this was supposed to be the quiet part, the part where they started again, but nothing gold stays, not without a fight. That evening, Elena stood at the sink, washing dishes with sleeves rolled and jaw tight. Luke approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. I'm sorry, he said. That he's here, that I can't promise it'll all be okay. She shook her head. You opened your home to us. You've already done more than most ever would. Luke leaned against the doorway. I need you to do something. What? Stay. She blinked. Stay here. No more running. I've seen what that does to people, to kids. Let him come. Let me stand between you and whatever's coming. She looked at him for a long, aching moment, then whispered, "And what if you lose?" Luke stepped forward, eyes locked with hers. "Then I lose standing where I'm supposed to be." The sky turned dark in the late afternoon without warning, not the slow fading of evening light, but a sudden shifting, like the sun had been pulled behind a curtain. Clouds churned low and heavy, pressing down on Meadow Ridge like a threat made real. The kind of sky that made people lock doors early, close shop, and speak softer. Luke stood by the porch, sleeves rolled, eyes tilted to the tree line. The wind had teeth now. Rain hadn't started, but the air was soaked with the weight of it, and with something else. A feeling. Inside the house, Elena moved quickly. She had packed the emergency bag that morning and now stood in the hallway, flashlight in one hand, Maisie in the other. The girl clutched her bear so tightly its stitching groaned. "Luke," Elena said, "if we go now, we might beat the worst of it." But Luke didn't move. He stood like a tree refusing the storm, rooted, watching, and then he heard it. Not thunder, not rain, tires. Again, the same car, no headlights, moving too slowly for a stranger. Luke turned to Elena. "Go to the cellar now. Luke, take her, lock the door, don't come out until I do." Elena looked at him, fear flashing through her like lightning. "Promise me," he said. She didn't argue. She knew better than to waste time. He watched them go. Elena rushing Maisie down the narrow stairwell into the storm shelter, the old wooden door creaking shut behind them. Then Luke stepped off the porch. The car pulled into the gravel with all the elegance of a threat. Driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, expensive coat, face too calm for a night like this. He wasn't the kind of man who shouted. He was the kind who expected the world to listen when he whispered. "You Luke?" the man asked. Luke didn't answer. "You're harboring someone that doesn't belong here." Still no answer. "She's unstable. You've been misled." Luke stepped forward once. Slowly, like a storm taking form. "You need to leave," he said. The man smirked. "You don't want to make this difficult." Luke glanced at the barn, the old tools still hanging. At the swing Elena had painted for Maisie. At the bedroom light still faintly glowing from when they'd read books the night before. Then back at the man. "I think you came to the wrong house," Luke said, "because this one has someone willing to lose everything for them." The man's hand twitched. Something shifted in his coat. Metal glint, brief and cold. Luke didn't wait. He charged. The scuffle was fast, ugly. Rain broke loose above them, thunder cracking as if the sky itself recoiled. Luke tackled the man into the gravel, fists swinging, ribs screaming with every blow. They struggled. The kind of fight that isn't about winning, just about lasting, longer than the fear. The gun slid across the ground. Luke saw it, the man reached for it. Luke got there first, he didn't shoot. Just aimed. The man froze. "I was a father," Luke said, voice shaking. "I know what it means to lose a child. You don't get to touch hers." The man stayed still, calculating. "I'm calling the sheriff," Luke said. "You've got 2 minutes to disappear. If I see you again, I won't give you a second one." The man stood, brushed dirt from his coat like the fight had been a business meeting. He didn't speak, just turned, walked to the car, drove off, headlights still. Off. Luke stood in the rain for a long time, not moving. His knuckles bled, his back screamed, but he had never felt more alive. Not since Amy, not since Emily, not since the night everything fell apart, because this time he had stood, and he hadn't lost. The cellar door creaked open. Elena stepped out, Maisie tucked into her side, wide-eyed but unhurt. Luke turned. Elena ran to him. There were no words, just arms, tight, desperate, alive. Maisie slipped in between them, small arms wrapping around Luke's waist, bare-pressed, to his chest, and in the pouring rain they held each other like a family who had fought their way into existence, one moment at a time. That night, they sat inside with the lantern burning low, thunder rolling like a memory in the distance. Luke lay on the floor, Maisie curled beside him, her breathing steady, her fingers lightly gripping his shirt. Elena knelt nearby, hair damp, eyes red. He looked up at her and whispered, "I thought I was done with this part of me." She reached for his hand. "You never were," she said. "You just needed a reason." Luke turned his head, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, slept, without watching the door. The morning after the storm was too still, no birds, no wind. Just the faint scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and something darker. Luke woke first. Maisie was still curled at his side, her hair mussed, her hand still lightly gripping the fabric of his flannel shirt. Elena sat nearby in the rocker, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the wood stove like it might whisper something she needed to hear. For a moment, it was quiet. Then the smell hit him. Sharp, bitter, and unmistakable. Smoke. Not from the stove. Luke stood, moving fast, threw open the front door. The wind had shifted. His eyes followed the line of trees, down the hill across the field, to the old farmhouse, Elena's rental. It was burning. By the time they reached it, the flames had taken most of the roof. Black smoke billowed from shattered windows, the air, thick with the hiss of wet wood turning to ash. It hadn't started from lightning. Luke could tell. The fire had started low, intentionally, quietly. A message, not an accident. Elena stood frozen. Maisie clung to her leg. Luke stepped forward without thinking, toward the heat, the ruin, the stench of loss. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The house was empty. It had been since the night before. But something inside them was still burning. Later, when the fire was out and the ash cooled, they walked through what remained. The sofa was a black frame. Maisie's coloring books gone. The small ceramic lamp Elena had bought in a second-hand store, the one she'd once said reminded her of better times, had shattered, its base scorched to glass. Luke found the iron skillet she'd loved, warped but salvageable. He picked it up, held it for a moment, then handed it to her without a word. She stared at it like it might still hold the scent of garlic and thyme. That afternoon they sat on the steps of Luke's porch. None of them spoke much. The weight of what they'd built, and fragile, temporary, beautiful, now sat in a pile of char and smoke across the field. And even though they were safe, even though they had each other, Luke knew, home wasn't just about people, it was also about place. And losing that place, again, still hurt like hell. Maisie dozed in his lap, her bare dirt streaked but somehow still intact. Elena sat beside him, staring out at the field. Her hands were empty. She looked like someone remembering how to grieve. Luke wanted to say something. Anything. But the truth was he didn't have the words. That night he built a fire in the hearth and cooked stew on the stovetop. The house smelled like rosemary and smoke. They ate in silence, lit by the amber flicker of firelight. Maisie curled up early, exhausted. When Elena stood to tuck her in, Luke reached for her hand, just lightly. A question, not a command. She paused. Then, turned back. "I should have seen it coming," she said quietly. "He never needed to hurt me to win. He just had to take away whatever I tried to build." "He didn't take everything," Luke said. "He didn't take you. Or her. Not yet. He won't." "How do you know?" "Because I've lost before. And I didn't fight then. But I will now." She looked at him for a long, trembling second. Then she said, "I believe you." Later that evening, Luke stood at the window and watched the wind move through the trees. The stars were faint above the haze, but they were there. Behind him, the house was still. And yet, not empty. He stepped outside, barefoot, onto the cool porch. The swing creaked gently as he sat. The smell of ash clung to his skin, to his clothes, to the night. But it wasn't the kind of smell that chased you away anymore. It was the kind that reminded you what was worth rebuilding. The day after the fire, the town showed up. Not with sirens or speeches, but with hands. Calloused, gentle, willing. Sheriff Miller came first before sunrise with a truckload of lumber and a thermos of strong black coffee. He didn't knock, just stood on the porch and said, "Heard you've got a rebuild to do." Luke nodded. "We do." By noon, Mrs. Alden from the bakery brought over 2 pies and a box of fresh bread. "For the workers," she said, even though no one had officially volunteered yet. By 3 o'clock, 5 more trucks rolled up. One carried tarps and hammers. Another, a wheelbarrow full of salvaged bricks. A retired plumber. A teenage boy with strong arms and a soft heart. Even Mr. Gallagher, who hadn't spoken to Luke since the fire 3 years back, dropped off a stack of shingles and muttered, "They'll need a proper roof this time." Maisie stood on the porch, wide-eyed, as the first nail was driven. "Are they building a new house?" she asked. "No," Luke said, kneeling beside her. "They're helping us fix this one, so it can hold all of us." She nodded solemnly, like it made sense in a language only children fully understood. She held her bear tighter and added, "We should make them cookies." Luke smiled. "You'd better talk to your mom about that." Elena spent the morning cleaning. The guest room that had never quite been a bedroom, then the shed, then the pantry. Luke knew the look in her eyes. The desperate need to move, to do something, to prove she still had power over her own life. Later, when he handed her a brush to help stain the new porch railing, she paused, not because she didn't want to, but because no one had asked her to join before. She dipped the brush in slowly, then began. Side by side, they worked in rhythm. Silence at first, then words. "People don't just help like this," she whispered. "In this town, they do. But why us?" Luke glanced at her. "Because they see what we've built, and they want to be part of holding it up." The days that followed were the kind people don't write songs about, but maybe they should. The kind where progress is measured in planks nailed and cookies shared. Where people show up not to fix what's broken, but to remind you it's worth fixing. Maisie learned names: Mr. Dave, the woodcutter with the crooked smile. Lila, who brought her watercolor paints and taught her how to mix lavender blue. Someone donated a quilt. Someone else left a pot of daisies by the gate. No one asked for thanks. They just came, and they stayed. At the end of the week, Luke and Elena stood in the backyard, arms flecked with sawdust, cheeks warmed by the fire pit they'd built from scratch. Wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. "You're bleeding," Elena said softly, brushing a nick on his hand. He glanced down. "Wouldn't be a real build without blood." She smiled. "Or sweat. And maybe just a few tears." She nodded. Then, added quietly, "I'm not afraid anymore." Luke turned to her. "Not of him," she clarified. "Not of being seen. Not of staying." He didn't speak right away. Then slowly, he reached into the bag beside him and pulled out a small tree. It wasn't much yet. Just a thin trunk, a few brave leaves. "A rose tree," he said. "Old kind. The roots take deep, survives frost, fire, if you let it." Elena stared at it. "Where did you get it?" "Gallagher's place. He said it's from the same line his wife planted 50 years ago. Told me it blooms late, but beautifully." She didn't answer, just stepped closer. Together they dug a small hole in the center of the new yard. Together they planted it. And when Maisie came out with a juice box and saw them, she grinned wide. "You planting magic?" she asked. Luke looked at Elena, then said, "Something like that." That night, they lit a fire in the hearth, sat on the new porch swing, its wood still smelling of pine and varnish. Maisie curled between them, sleep creeping in as she whispered, "This feels like a real house now." Elena kissed the top of her daughter's head. Luke placed his arm across the back of the swing. Not touching Elena, not yet. But the distance had shrunk to almost nothing. For the first time in years, Luke didn't dream about fire. He dreamed about the tree blooming, bright, strong home. The roof was finished in early November. Not perfect, some seams still rough, one corner slightly off plumb, but strong, sturdy. It held against the wind like it was built to do so. Luke ran his hand along the ridge beam one last time, the grain smooth under his palm, then stepped down the ladder and exhaled. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. This house is ready. Later that morning, Maisie dragged a blanket onto the porch and laid it out under the maple tree that had only recently begun to drop its leaves. She wore mismatched socks and a paper crown from the diner down the road. Her bear, newly restitched, sat at her side like a little king. Luke watched her from the kitchen window. "I think she's starting to believe we'll stay," Elena said beside him. He turned. She was holding 2 mugs, tea for her, coffee for him. Her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled. Still barefoot, still at ease. "She's not the only one," Luke said. They sat on the porch steps, the early sun pressing warm against their shoulders, the rose tree behind them, small but steady. A single bud had appeared at the tip of one branch. Not open yet, but close. A promise waiting to bloom. "I keep thinking about that first night," Elena said quietly. "How I almost didn't knock." Luke looked at her. "How I almost didn't open the door." They sat in the silence that followed. Not awkward, not afraid. Just present. "There's still fear in me," she admitted. "Still nights, I wake up and check the locks. Still moments where I wonder if we're safe." "We're safer than we were," he said. "And that's enough for now." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. Luke didn't move, didn't flinch, just breathed. And for the first time in years, he wasn't holding his breath. They didn't need rings, didn't need paperwork. They didn't even use the word of. But they were building something far more durable, a habit of staying, of choosing each other, every day. That evening, after dinner, Luke took Maisie outside to show her the stars. "Look up," he said, pointing. "That's Orion." She followed his finger. "The one with the belt?" "Yep, 3 stars in a row." Maisie took a long breath. "It's nice," she said. "But I like the roof better." Luke raised an eyebrow. "The roof?" "Yeah," she said, "because that's where we were, before we were a family." He looked at her, this child who had arrived with shadows under her eyes and now spoke with soft confidence. He reached down and squeezed her hand. "You're right," he said. "That's exactly where it started." Later that night, Luke stood alone at the edge of the yard. The house glowed behind him, golden in the windows, flickering in the hearth. The tree stood still, the roof held steady, the porch swing creaked. Inside, Elena was tucking Maisie in, reading her a story, one about a bear who lost its way and found a home in the arms of strangers who became something more. Luke closed his eyes, felt the wind stir gently around him, and whispered, "We don't promise forever, but we choose each other, every day, even before the storm. Maybe it's not about where you came from or what you've lost. Maybe it's about who stands beside you when the storm finally passes." If this story touched your heart, even just a little, go ahead and tap like and subscribe to stay with us. We've got more stories like this waiting. And maybe, just maybe, one of them is yours.